just like I told you about that Charlotte Flair and Ric Flair mishap, right? Ric Flair was supposed to trip the other girl in that
Yeah.
match and ends up tripping Charlotte. And on the fly, they start kind of just going with it to sell, and not break character. It's only been recently that breaking character outside of the ring has been an okay thing. That used to not be the case. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, you were in character when you went out and greeted fans, when you were out doing stuff. Like, no matter what you did, you were in character. Interviews, you were in character. That kind of stuff. The old Vader interview with, who was he doing an interview with? I don't remember. I think it was, what's his name? Jerry Springer. I think he did an interview, like an actual interview, sit down interview with Jerry Springer. And there was a big ordeal because they asked him if wrestling was fake. And he was staying in character. He's like, fake? Fake? Like, he just, like, explodes and throws a table and whatever. And it was all impromptu. Like, it wasn't planned. But he did that to stay in character as Vader and whatever on national television during the interview. It was really entertaining back then because the embracing of the characters that sold were a big deal. So same with the Undertaker. If you watch that documentary, they talk about the whole thing where Undertaker never broke character. Like, he never came out of
Right.
character. You know, like they stayed with the whole kayfabe the whole time. That was a big deal, back then. And Undertaker, in and out, like, dressed the part, like, did everything when he was walking to the arena to sell the part. That was a big thing. That you don't get that anymore. The wrestlers outside the arena are
Right.
very much who they
So
are.
so why not? They just gotta protect their talent, or
I think at
is
this
it
point it's just the gig is up, right? Back then you were able to sell the idea that these guys were the character. Now you can't do that.
mm,
Realistically, like, people know that wrestling,
too much social media
right?
and all that?
Everybody knows that wrestling is what it is, right? It's entertaining to watch. Wrestling has transformed. Wrestling is a far more spectacular in-ring thing. The flips are bigger, the jumps are higher, the bumps are bigger. The stuff that's being done is more than it ever was back then on, everyday matches. People go through more tables today than they ever did back then. On regular television, episodes of Raw and SmackDown. That's a big deal, and I think that at this point, people understand that the behind the scenes of wrestling is really entertaining if you know kind of the ins and outs of the business. The business wall broke down. There used to be this big curtain, right? And you didn't really know what was going on behind the business
Yeah.
unless you were in it. That's gone. Now everybody knows how it goes. Social media and the internet really broke down the idea that these people got to be sheltered away from the public eye. That's all kind of gone. And I think that's a lot of why their characters aren't really who they are outside the ring. But most characters in today's wrestling are a piece of who they are. So that's kind of a big deal, like Sasha Banks and some of the big name stars. They really just kind of take a piece of who they are and they magnify it into whatever the character is, and that's what you see on television. I don't remember exactly how Undertaker was found. I know he was wrestling he wrestled at the Sportatorium here in Dallas. Was his first mainstream match, and he was I forget who it was that he had to wrestle against, but he got there and he had to have a valet, and the valet was who would become Paul Bearer. Um, but he runs out like halfway into the whole entrance thing, and Undertaker wasn't Undertaker at that point, and he looks over and he's like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm your valet now, and it was all kind of on the spot at the
So they
Sportatorium.
were valeted that far back, like that would have been in the 80s, right?
Valets have existed since wrestling started, when wrestling became
But just the
mainstream.
fact that Paul Bearer and Undertaker actually met that long ago before they ended up being Paul Bearer and the
Yeah,
Undertaker,
if
that's pretty
if you
crazy.
want, Texas Red was who the Undertaker was on the independent scene. Texas Red. And so if you go back and watch the Paul Bearer documentary, the Paul Bearer documentary talks about where he got his start into wrestling. He wanted to be a wrestler. He was a wrestler, and then it didn't work out as well, so he became a valet. But he was actually a funeral home director before he got into being a valet in wrestling and into wrestling. So it was really crazy. But he wasn't that character. Paul Bearer wasn't that character in the independent scene. He was what was it, like Crazy Buddy something or whatever, and he came out with a cane and blonde hair and ran around all energetic and crazy like and managed like a whole stable of guys at one point. And that's when he started managing Texas Red or whatever on the indie scene in the Sportatorium. Now here's the thing, you could go to indie matches back then in the 90s and the 80s, and if you went there, the storyline that you got in that moment right there inside that arena would have nothing to do with anything else. You might go the next night or the next weekend and watch the same wrestlers, down in Austin or somewhere else. You would never know that the story existed. Two different wrestling promotions doing their own different things. A lot of times they just kind of made up the story on the fly with the guys in the back that were running the promotion. And they're like, oh, tonight we're going to do this, and you two are going to face, and here's the story. Run out there and tell this kind of quick story. And it's really entertaining if you watch the Paul Bearer documentary, because they talk about him managing The Undertaker and how they met originally with.
Like he was his actual talent manager too.
No, he was just a valet, but he was working, and like they paired them together. Like he didn't have a choice; they just paired him together. So Undertaker got signed to WWE. Okay, wrestling on the Indies. Undertaker wrestled quite a few very famous people on the Indies. Undertaker goes to WWE. He gets signed, and they put him with Brother Love, right? And Brother Love's his valet, but it's selling, but it's not selling as well as they wanted. And Brother Love had some other obligations, in talent relations behind the picture that he was trying to do. And so they basically were like, well, we got to do something. So Undertaker's like, hey, well, this guy, manage me. And he had been out of doing wrestling for a while. He was back to managing a funeral home. And so WWE calls him up and brings him in. And Vince McMahon's like, oh, I don't know what we're gonna make you, and I don't know what we're gonna do, and he's like, what do you do in life? And he's like, well, I'm a funeral home director, and he's like, a mortician,
Yeah.
The Undertaker,
I just signed
Paul
this guy.
Bearer, like, and they like, there's this whole thing where he was coming up with the mortician or whatever, and apparently Paul Bearer like runs down the hall and is talking to somebody, and I forget who it was. But somebody's like, no, you're Paul Bearer. And that's when he's like, oh, Paul Bearer. And they go pitch it to Vince. And Vince is like, yeah, Paul Bearer. Get it, Paul Bearer and The Undertaker. So anyway, it was definitely interesting. And I definitely thought that, as far as the way that Paul Bearer Undertaker combo came together, it was really entertaining. So if you watch those documentaries, they kind of piece that whole thing together and talk to you about, like, you get to see Undertaker on the indie circuit a little bit. It's fun. I got to see a bunch of wrestlers back in the Sportatorium in Dallas. Man, that place had some history. The Von Erichs and a number of other big name wrestlers that came through there. A lot of fun to watch. But knowing Undertaker got to wrestle there and was wrestling there at the same time that I was there, as a little kid watching in the Sportatorium, that's fun. Jobbers are people that come in and just lose on purpose. They're there to let whoever the talent is look good. So when you have the term squash match means that one talent just destroys the other person to make them look over the top good. That happens a lot. So
You're just there to get destroyed.
it gets destroyed. That happens a lot. It's called a squash match. It's a real thing.
They just bring someone in off the street or from the bullpen
Yeah,
or something.
a lot of times when you see the squash matches, when they were on the road traveling before COVID, they would go to whatever the local wrestling promotion is, and they would have 2 or 3 like standby talents. So anytime you see all the security guards come out of the back, like police officers, security guards, those types of things, where people come out in uniform and get assaulted by a wrestler, Those are not actual security guards or actual police officers. They are wrestlers from an independent promotion that WWE pays a very small amount of money or even just asks to volunteer to come in and take a bump during some type of promo segment or whatever. So you have that where you've got.
Which of course they probably take just to get on
Oh, sure.
TV.
Well, I mean, you want to get in with a promotion, right? You want to get your name with somebody behind the scenes, and you want to be seen on the promotion and be able to say you've worked with the promotion. So, yeah, a lot of those guys would volunteer just to be there, or, they get paid, 25 or $30 to show up type of thing. As extras, essentially. Think of it like extras in a movie. If you want to be an extra in a movie, it's kind of the same thing. Like, hey, yeah, come on, you guys, I need 5 or 6 guys, and the wrestling promotion will be like, all right, you, go be there on TV, and you sit in the back, and then you're just hoping like, oh man, they got a segment, cool, I get to be a security guard on this segment, and I'm gonna go get my face punched in by Brock Lesnar trying to hold him back or something, and that's what they end up doing.